Who the hell taught Iran to play it like this? The U.S. had just announced a blockade east of the Gulf of Oman and the Strait of Hormuz, setting up a Russian doll-style blockade, Iran on the inside, U.S. on the outside. Then Iran turned around and lifted its blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, instantly dumping all the pressure back on the U.S. and leaving its allies to stab America in the back. Which one of the 36 stratagems is this exactly? Let's get into today's topic. The hidden genius behind Iran not blocking the strait. U.S.-Iran talks fell apart. Trump got nothing out of it and lost his temper. So on the 12th local time, he announced a blockade of all ships entering or leaving Iranian ports and coastal waters. But wasn't the U.S. always pushing to keep the Strait of Hormuz open? Now they're doing the blockading? As crazy as it sounds, with Iran refusing to budge, the Donald could still spin it as pressure to restore freedom of navigation in the strait, even if it means clobbering oil tankers from every country, no exceptions. But the very next day, U.S. Central Command officially kicked off the blockade operation, deploying over 10,000 troops, 15 warships, and dozens of fighter jets, loudly declaring they'd cut off Iran's maritime trade. Meanwhile, Iran's government went and issued Bulletin Number 59, formally lifting the military blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, allowing all non-military vessels safe passage after registration. You think Iran chickened out? Actually, this move not only blindsided the U.S. military, it hung America out to dry, because Trump's real goal was never to keep the Strait of Hormuz open. He was using Iran's blockade as an excuse to flex U.S. military muscle in the Middle East. At the same time, Iran was still doing oil trade with China and even tried setting up a toll booth in the strait, demanding transit fees from passing tankers and stipulating that only ships paying in non-dollar currencies like local currency or RMB could pass. That was a direct hit on U.S. petrodollar dominance. It drove Trump not only to want a piece of the action, but to flip the table entirely with a double blockade, dragging every nation down with him. And then Iran turned the tables, making the U.S. the villain blocking the strait. On the surface, Iran lifted the blockade. I'm out, you play alone move, letting the U.S. do its solo act. But beneath that, two killer moves were hidden. First, it was a direct slap in America's face. Even if Iran doesn't block the strait, the U.S. can't seal it either. According to Xinhua, though the U.S. military claimed a full blockade of Iranian ports, shipping data shows 8 vessels sailed right through the strait on April 14th, while the U.S. blockade existed in name only. Chinese oil tankers, under the protection of Type 54A frigates, strolled right through without a care. The second move was even sharper. Though Iran stopped blocking the strait, it now explicitly requires registered passage. Under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, international straits are supposed to have free passage, but Iran signed the convention and never ratified it. Now, by requiring registration, it turns transit passage into a privilege that Iran gets to approve. Once that precedent is set, Iran holds all the legal cards. From now on, who gets through the strait and who doesn't? And the fact that U.S. warships and supply vessels are military assets that can't pass through into the Persian Gulf and the Middle Eastern interior. All of that is now Iran's call. More crucially, by lifting the blockade, Iran completely dumped the blame for choking energy flows onto the U.S. This is both a divide-and-conquer play and a strike at the root. While precisely splintering the Western alliance, it also shakes the foundation of the petrodollar. According to an IEA report from April 14th, traffic through the Strait of Hormuz has plunged nearly 80% since the crisis began. Global oil demand hasn't just faced supply disruption, it's hit the largest shortfall in history. Oil prices have skyrocketed, and petrochemical supply chains across Asia have been thrown into chaos. And now the U.S. has to take the blame for all of it. Countries like Japan and South Korea, heavily dependent on Middle Eastern crude, are getting hit hardest. Refineries are entering states of emergency. Yet after Iran lifted the blockade, Japanese, South Korean, and European merchant ships could clearly pull up and load oil, but the U.S. Navy is turning them away. Facing inflation at home and factory shutdowns, these countries have no choice but to bite the bullet and pressure the U.S. America's old sidekicks are defecting en masse, pushing the U.S. alliance system to the brink of fracture. And that is the essence of Iran's divide-and-conquer strategy. Without firing a single shot, it leaves the U.S. isolated and alone, far more lethal than a direct war.